Hi there, welcome to the Great Updraft. You're here with Ross. I make weekly videos with tools for self-transformation, so do subscribe to my channel to stay up to date. And also head to my website for articles, ebooks, and courses. So in today's video, we're going to talk about the blocks to self-transformation, the top four blocks. And really, self-transformation, it sounds really exciting. It sounds like almost like a religious quest that we're going on here, and it all sounds wonderful and like it's going to be fun and games. But actually, it's a really challenging process, and there's many obstacles in our way. And what I want to do is I want to go into the top four obstacles that I've identified, both by going through this process myself and also by looking at other people going through this process and seeing what the common blocks are for people. So let's get to the first block, or number four. This is number four, and this is impatience. So what I notice, especially for people who are starting out and they're just trying to put basic habits in place in their life, is that they like the idea of, maybe it's losing weight, for example. They like the idea of losing weight, but they don't actually want to go through the process of losing weight, which is not an easy process, especially if you've got really bad eating habits and you've always had them. And so we want to change. We have this idea of who we could become, and but we never actually mobilize ourselves to go through the process. And I think this has a lot to do with impatience. Because what often happens is we often adopt a habit. We're talking about weight loss here. This is the example. So let's say we adopt the habit of going to the gym on a regular basis. What happens is the first week or the first month or the first 2 months that you go to the gym, because it's something that you've perhaps never done before, or you've never committed yourself to with such enthusiasm, what happens is that for the first while it's really exciting and it seems new and it seems like, oh, I'm becoming this new person and this is gonna be me forever. What then happens is that there's usually a slump, and it's actually called a plateau. Often people who write about learning call these plateaus, where you have a period of initial improvement and then you hit a point where the progress slows and your initial enthusiasm tends to wear off as a result. What happens is people then take this as a sign that it's not working and that this isn't the right journey for them. Going to the gym isn't right for them, or whatever it may be, the particular example. What's happening here is that at the beginning we don't have the habit built up. Our life reflects sort of the old identity we used to have, and creating a life that's centered around and it's built around this new identity, say the healthy person that does go to the gym, that doesn't exist. Our whole life reflects the person that doesn't go to the gym. And so in the beginning it's hard to it's hard to make that step, and it's hard to put those habits in place. And this really stems from impatience, because we get lost in our initial sort of fantasies or our ideas of what it's going to be like to change this aspect of our lives. When we actually, that's the mind. That's like it's almost like the reptilian brain. It's like the need for instant change and instant growth and improvement. But then we actually look at the reality of the situation and what actually needs to be done for change to happen. Yeah, it's quite onerous, and that's when we lose hope and we lose faith and the impatience comes in. And what I want to say here is that really changing your identity and changing it to a point where putting habits in place and putting new change in place and actually making change a part of your identity, so becoming so used to change that you're open to it and you're actually sort of constantly ready for it. It depends on your starting point, but it takes years and decades to do that. And that isn't an issue. It's just that's the That's what it is. That's the journey. And we shouldn't get lost in that. We should realize that this is part of the process, and it's just how it works. We need to go through that process, and ultimately, once we do become that person whose life does reflect, high quality health, high quality relationships, high quality spirituality, high quality career, once we become that person, we're going to realize just how valuable the process was. At the start, we can't see that because we've not gone through it yet. And this process of self-transformation that I talk about it's a lifelong, life-wide process. Life-wide meaning it's an invented word, meaning it impregnates our entire life if we're doing it properly. If it's a whole, holistic, sort of integral transformation, it involves our whole life. And so we have to think really hard about this. It's not a short-term endeavor, it's a long-term endeavor, and realizing just what the benefits are in the long term really helps us to build up that patient mindset that we're going to need to be able to go through that. And this process, there's many ups, downs, and reverses and tough periods in this process. It's not like if you're improving your health, for example, you're going from being overweight and having a really bad diet. If that's where you're starting, it's not that it's just like a smooth journey upwards to becoming a healthy person. What actually really happens is that you might see like a general upward trend, but there's lots of dips and bumps and ups and downs along the way. And really, our job is not to go like that. Our job is really to just keep the curve steady, keep it a steady improvement, and not get too impatient, not needing the results so desperately, and realizing that the results aren't what change you. The process is what changes you, and then the results come as a result of going through the process. And what I've actually noticed in my own journey is that self-transformation can be exponential. It can actually go like this, as a hockey stick curve, as they call it. It can be like that, but that takes time. It means that change and growth, as I said, and once change and growth actually becomes part of our identity and we start to relish it instead of resisting it, which is what happens when we're not used to these habits. We're not used to living healthily. We're not used to having great relationships. Once that's done, growth can become exponential and your identity can change quickly and things can move in your life very quickly. And so that's another reason to stay optimistic and to realize that this is why you need patience, because at the start it's not going to be like that, and you just have to accept and work with it. Let's look at tips then for overcoming this impatience problem, which is really look for this in yourself, because I see it a lot. I see it myself, I see it in other people, and often it just stops us from even getting on the path, because once we get on the path, we get off quite quickly because then we really realize what's involved. First tip is to create habits that you can actually stick with. So take the example of, health, physical health. People often, they set the target of going to the gym and they say, oh, I'm going to go for 2 hours a day when they've never been to the gym in your life. That's maybe an exaggeration, but it's just to show you the kind of goals that people set for themselves. What you should really do is if that's your situation, is to maybe go for 30 minutes a day, or an hour every 2 days, or an hour and a half every 3 days. Make it something that you can actually stick to, and go lower, aim lower instead of higher. Aim lower, because what will happen is once you create those habits that are fairly easy to implement, say 30 minutes every couple of days, or an hour every 3 days, whatever length of time it is, once you get those in place, the bigger habits that seem like a dream to you right now, that seem completely unrealistic, those will actually be much more achievable, because you've trained your body and your mind into this new way of living, and you've actually gone through some sort of identity change in that process. So create habits that you can stick with. Second tip for overcoming impatience is just to change your time scale completely. Just days and weeks is not going to work here. So days and weeks to changing career into something you're passionate about, changing your health situation, changing your financial situation in days and weeks, most likely is not going to happen. And what you're going to do is you're actually going to you're going to try and do this, and you're just going to drop straight down, because you can't keep up that level of intensity and energy, and change just doesn't happen over days and weeks. Change it to years and decades, and be thinking about how the implement change that you're going to actually be able to keep up for years and decades, and think how that change is going to impact your life years and decades from now. Don't stop thinking days and weeks in advance. And there's a principle, this is the third tip, this is the proportional patience principle, the proportional patience principle. Quite a mouth twister. Basically what this says is that the bigger the change that you're trying to implement, the more patience you need, which is, it's actually really obvious, but how often do we apply this principle? So if you're trying to, create your dream career, you have to sort of imbue everything that you do with the patience that corresponds to a goal of that size. And often you have to sort of put your desire and the initial sort of burst of energy, you have to sort of put that on the back burner in a sense. Use that, but when you're actually looking at the journey as a whole, use the proportional patience principle and realize that the more it's worth, the more patience you need. Great, so that was the first top barrier to our self-transformation. Let's look at the third one. Well, it's number 3. That's external influences. So the first barrier that I talked about is an internal barrier. It's to do with our level of patience. This one is really an external one in a sense. And it's not that we don't have control over it, but it's something that we don't have direct influence over, perhaps, as we do with our patience. And these are external influences in our life. So there are many external influences that stop us from self-transforming. I think the one that we're going to look at today is other people. So other people often stop us from self-transforming. Not that they're evil, but that they don't help us, and they hold us back, perhaps often without wanting to. And to illustrate this, there's a couple of sort of sayings or proverbs that I like that really illustrate this problem. The first one is that birds of a feather flock together. So similar people tend to hang out. They tend to be friends, colleagues, family members, and so on. And that people, that's the first sort of proverb, the first thing to remember. The second one is that people on average don't earn any more or less than 20% above or below their peers. So if all your peers are earning £30,000 a year, you're not likely to earn any more than 20% or less than 20% of that. And this goes way beyond salary. It's not just about salary, although it's an interesting fact. It's really just to see that the people that you surround yourself with have an influence on you all the time, and you probably don't even realize that this is going on. So let me give you a concrete example of this. Let's say if you have a boring career in a boring office that you don't like. What's going to happen is that most likely your friends and colleagues also have a similar job. Otherwise, they wouldn't be your friends and colleagues. Your colleagues are probably in the same situation as you are, and your friends most likely are the same as well. What happens is that this creates sort of an echo chamber in your life. So even if you read a book or you watch a video about having passion in your career, and you start to think, this is a possibility for me. What's going to happen is, as soon as you share that idea, this passion or this potential idea, this potential possibility for you, once you share it with those people, they're just going to knock you back and they're going to say, oh, it's not possible. Look at our job. Look at our office. Look at our boss. Look at all this. Look at all this drudgery that we have to go through every day. Passion isn't possible in career. And so it creates this chamber effect where you've got no one to share it with. You've not got any mirrors that reflect your desire to change your career, for example. And what happens to most people in this case then is that actually they have this idea of a career, I can't have a passionate career. And it just gets reinforced and reinforced and reinforced by their friends, family, and colleagues, which means, of course, that their idea seems real, and it seems like that is actually true for everyone at all times, when it really is not true at all. And all this really just it impedes you from changing your career situation ever, because you're sort of lost in a maze, let's say. And this isn't just about career. This could happen in any area of our lives that we're trying to improve, because, as I said, our current life reflects, or our life always reflects us, and it reflects our beliefs, our habits, our patterns, who we are as a whole. And that includes, our life includes our friends and where we live and our situation. And so these patterns of like the external influences we have limiting us is always present in all areas of our lives. And it's not just friends either. It's things like the culture, the country that we're in, the culture at the time, the media that we take in. So the news, for example, social media, what social media outlets are we on? What accounts do we follow? Who do we listen to? Who lights us up on social media? And there's so many other factors that I don't have time to go into, but really everything that you're listening to and hearing and paying attention to, this is all affecting your results, and it often acts as a block for self-transformation, but it can be a catalyst. And I'm going to show you a few tips for making it a catalyst rather than a block. Tip number 1 is to create kind of a filter between yourself and those people who block your growth. So I'm not saying, like, if your family, for example, all have careers that they dislike and they're always talking from a very scarcity mindset about their career, that, I've got a bad salary and I've got a boring job and work is always terrible and I'm going to have to work till I'm 70 years old in this boring job, etc., etc. That's like the patterns you're running. You need to create a filter there. I'm not saying that you like disown your family. What I'm saying is that you create a filter and you realize that you can see their worldview, you can see their way of viewing career, and you realize that that is not the way you want to see your career anymore. And yeah, this process of putting filters down can be years, months, years, decades, because it's not just people, it's not just your family, it's really everything that's going on around you. You need to be strong enough to create that filter and to realize what you actually want from life, and to realize that the things that are entering, sometimes that are beyond your control, sometimes that is affecting you and it's not taking you to where you want to go. The second one is just to be very aware of all the information that you receive, and to really pay close attention to the messages and the assumptions in there. And yeah, this is, again, it can be a shocking process to go through, and for me, it's a never-ending process that I'm going through at the moment, to really see information for what it is before I allow it to enter in and influence my emotions and my thoughts and my habits and behavior. The third one is to deliberately seek out high quality friends and acquaintances. And so people who are on the same wavelength as you, people who say want a passionate career or have created one. And this you can do through meetup groups, internet forums, events in your local area, or even sort of friendship apps. You know, there's many possibilities, especially with the internet and the options that gives us. So what will happen is if you surround yourself with people that are on the same wavelength as you in terms of your self transformation, then that it creates this positive cycle, because your thoughts change because you're exposed to these people, and then they reinforce your thoughts. And these are not limiting thoughts; these are empowering thoughts this time. So those are the 3 tips for changing or to optimize what's coming in from the external. Great. Let's look at the block number 2 then, which is fear, which is, wow, this is a really huge block. You have to realize that the human mind is very catastrophic. Like, even in the modern world, in the West, like when we've got so many tools, we've got prosperity, we've got social security or benefits, depending on where you are in the world. We've got the free market, we've got education, possibilities for education coming out of our ears. People are still, the mind is still catastrophic. Look at your own mind, look at the news, look at the people around you. People are always looking for ways that things are going to go wrong. And this, it comes from the animal brain that we've got in us. You know, we've got the human part of our brain, which constitutes a huge volume of the brain. But underneath that, we've got these animal layers that correspond to our animal-like needs. And one of them is our tendency to look for danger and things that could go wrong, when really, relatively speaking, we have absolutely nothing to worry about. And we have actually the opposite. We've got all the tools that we need to self-transform. And yeah, we're talking about this in the context of self-transformation. So what happens is we contemplate our life. You know, we contemplate a realized version of ourselves, a future version of ourselves that inspires us, and it really resonates deeply with us, and it would mean us expressing ourselves in a way that we've never done before. But then, you know, that's our ideals, you know, that's like the human imagination there. But what happens is that our fear centers in the brain, these immediately start looking for ways that is not going to happen. And it just basically, it stops us from ever taking the action towards being that person. And yeah, look for this in yourself, because it's so common, you know. Even though we want to change, the fear of change is often outweighs sort of the benefits that we think that would bring to us. And a good way to see your inbuilt, like the most primitive inbuilt fears that you have, are on like the worst days that you have, like the days where you're in your worst mood, where you're worrying, where you're doubting, where you're scared. Really look for what's going through your mind on those days, because what I've noticed is that those most primitive and inbuilt fears, the ones that sort of go way back in my life history, and they probably come from some sort of childhood trauma that I've generalized, often come up on these worst days, and they really help me see the fear that I have and where I still need to work on. Yeah, what fears I still need to work on and overcome. And yeah, really look for these catastrophic stories that you tell yourself. So maybe you want to become an artist, for example, but you have this grand vision, but then you also have the fear that, oh, if I become an artist, I'm gonna wind up on the streets, because I can't paint, I've not got the marketing skills, no one's gonna buy my work. You see, like the mind takes like the lowest possibility the lowest possible outcome that could occur in every single area of that pursuit, and it multiplies them together and creates this dramatic, catastrophic, cataclysmic scenario, which once you've gone through these processes of self-transformation, you realize that these these ideas are really, they're not based on any facts. They're fears, and they're your conservative mind, your animal mind, trying to keep you in homeostasis, trying to stop you from changing your current situation, because often the familiar and the comfortable is more, is even if it's not great, it's preferable to the idea of a future or a better situation that might never unfold. My general strategy for fear, we're getting into strategy territory now, is to really look for the root fear. So look at your thoughts and your emotions and really look for what is the actual fear there. Like, don't get lost in the surface. Look for the underlying assumption, or the underlying idea that you have about yourself or about life. And there's something underlying all that. And once you get to that gem, you can then start to make it disappear. What you want to do then, once you've identified this root fear, this root idea that you have about yourself or what the world, you want to sort of question it. So question where it came from. Why do you believe this about yourself? How could it be wrong? Like, what experiences have I had in life that prove that that is not true, that it's a lie? And then look for counterexamples. So if you say, I can't become an artist because of this, and this, go and look at other artists and look at their history and look at where they came from and look at all the doubts and fears that they had on their journey. And you'll realize that it's actually, these fears are normal and that they're just part of the journey that you need to go through to become an artist, for example. So you want to look for evidence that contradicts your fear and makes it look, it contextualizes it. Instead of it being like the filter through which you see the world, it's really just, it's like an imperfection. It's a temporary thing that's going on in your mind. And then you want to train your mind on the opposite. So if you're saying, I can't develop the right marketing skills for my business, what you want to do is that's a good like boost to get you to go and just learn marketing, just to go and buy a book, take a course, because it's showing you sort of what you need to do in order to advance. But training your mind on the opposite, whenever you have this negative thought, you literally say to yourself out loud, no, I am capable of doing this. I am capable of learning marketing. I am capable of becoming an artist. And when, what you're doing there is you're taking the negative thought, you're becoming aware of it, and then you're replacing it with something else. And over time, that'll train you to not indulge in the negative thinking and the fear in the first place. Great. Now we're going to get to the ultimate block. This is like the ultimate block, which kind of explains the other three as well. This is the ultimate of the ultimate block to self-transformation. And this is the habit of being you. It sounds very poetic and philosophical and lovely. So let's look at actually what this means. I always remember one of my meditation instructors said to me that self is a habit. And what she meant this on a spiritual level in terms of like, we identify as being a certain person because we are used to it and we run patterns of behavior. And I'm not looking at it necessarily from that perspective at the moment, but I mean more on a psychological level in terms of looking at the very patterns themselves. And what I want you to do is we're going to do like a thought experiment for this. So I want you to think back to this morning when you woke up, and you realize that when you wake up, you have no idea what's happened for the last 7 or 8 hours. You were in a kind of abyss, or you were in a dream state, or you were in a state where there was no dream, there was no sensory stimuli there. You're in this kind of abyss, you're in this blank state. Then what happens is when you wake up in your first person experience, what happens is that your mind, your mental habits and your thoughts and your emotions all, they appear again. It's like, oh, I'm here, I'm awake, it's 7 o'clock in the morning, I'm here and it's me. And your mind starts, you start planning what you're going to do for the day. You're thinking about breakfast, you're thinking about having a shower, you're thinking about getting ready for what you're going to do that day. And we forget about the fact that that is all taking place on this background, this abyss. Like, we have the abyss, and then we have our sense of identity and all our patterns in front of us. And we just, as soon as we get up out of bed and we start going about the day, we forget that we're even running these patterns. We forget that these thoughts and emotions aren't like a constant. They're part of like the waking state, and they're part of what we go through every day in our normal life, but they're not constant, permanent thing. What's happening here is that on this background of blank, this background of no sensory input, what's happening is that we have formed sort of psychological habits and grooves. And these are sort of embedded in our neural pathways, our neural patterns that fired over and over again. They're stored in our memory, and they're stored in our sense of identity as being a person. And after we repeat these patterns over and over again for days, months, years, and decades, we have this is what creates our sense of identity, because we start to actually feel like in our bones, we start to feel that this is who we are. Like, these thoughts are who I am. These mental processes are who I am. These emotions that I'm feeling are who I am, because I'm experiencing them over and over again, and there seems to be nothing that I can really do about it. And that this is the habit of being you. It's the habit of having all these patterns and emotions that you're going through every single day that you think can't be changed, and that you think are just an inevitable part of being alive, of being a human being. But actually that really isn't the case, and that they can be changed. And we'll get to the solutions in a minute, but I want to go into more depth on this. The second thing I want you to realize is I want you to put your attention on the fact that everything that you're aware of right now, so you're watching this video, you're hearing these words, you're feeling your body, you're having thoughts, you're having images in your mind, you're having conversations with yourself, you've got songs going on there, you're thinking of your friends and family and your obligations. All of that, everything that you're experiencing right now, that you can, say, put your finger on, it's all happening in front of you. There's like a screen on which all of this is happening, and you're watching it all. This is like the witness consciousness. It's like you're at a theater, and in front of your eyes is your life is unfolding. But you can contact this identity that is beyond all of the content, all of the things that are actually happening in your sensations. And at one point, this, our sensory world never existed for us. We didn't have senses. Like, perhaps when we were back in the womb or before that, there was no senses. We weren't experiencing anything. What were we at that point? And if you can tune into that sense of self, that deeper sense of being a person, like being alive, which is not entwined in the sensory world, what you can then see is that you can see all these habits and patterns that you formed much better, because you have like a light that shines onto them, and that it separates you from them. What human beings do is we just, past a certain point in our lives, we just forget about this deeper background, this deeper awareness that is not tied, it's not limited to any certain thought or certain emotion or certain behavior. It sees all of them like a screen, and it allows them to be there. We forget about this deeper sense of identity, and we get lost in all the content. We get lost in our thoughts, our sense of self, our emotions, And that really, these are the things that stop us from self-transforming. And what we actually have in front of us, we don't have, in a sense, one thing we do have is we have these inbuilt emotions, thoughts, and behaviors. What we also have is we have a blank canvas in front of us. We have, it's like a sandbox. We have the ability to alter our mental patterns and our emotional patterns to what we want them to be. And it's a matter of repetition and doing it over and over again, and making the clear intention to come back to this and make it a constant project for us. It's not changing all of these mental patterns that are happening in front of us and that create our sense of identity. It's not like it's like building a skyscraper. It's like carving a statue of marble. It takes time and it takes diligent effort and repetition to actually change what is going on, to change all the repetition that is there. That may seem very abstract, but if you look at all your repetitive thoughts that you have, let's say the thoughts of, or I am lazy, or I am a productive or unproductive person, whatever one it is, unproductive person, or I am good at this, or I am good at that. Those are all mental habits that are happening in front of you. They're not who you are. They're mental habits that have built up over time and that you've come to be identified with. So how do we actually do something about this? How do we take this blank slate that we have, or this block of marble that we have, and how do we actually sculpt it into something that it's behind our self-transformation? It's actually helping us in our process of self-transformation rather than blocking us all the time, because a lot of these patterns and behavior do just block us, because it's just their scarcity thinking and their fear-based approach just stops us in our tracks. Tip 1 to alter these, or to begin to alter these, because it's a really long process, is to really become more aware of this cage. Like, become aware of all these mental patterns that you're running, that you identify with. This is really like it's a spiritual pursuit, which comes into like the third pillar that I talked about in my last video. It's a spiritual pursuit because it requires mindfulness. It requires you bringing awareness to your thoughts and emotions. And it's also a self-mastery pursuit as well, because you have to, it's not just about bringing awareness to your thoughts and emotions. It's actually being willing to change them. And that's to do with self-mastery, to do with psychological mastery. You have to be looking for thoughts of limitation, thoughts of scarcity, thoughts of depression. Any mental pattern that you're running that is not serving you and that it's holding you back in your self-transformation. You've just become identified with it, and it maybe comes from bad experiences in life that you've had, but it's not permanent. It can be changed. And the first step is to just become aware of all of these. And there's, it's really like, it's like digging a never-ending hole. It's a very long journey. The second tip is to play this habit, like to play this repetition at its own game by forming good habits and implementing things that you can do on a regular basis. Like maybe it's, reading more on a regular basis. Maybe it's working on your business every single day. What these habits do is it actually alters. It's not just a matter of like, oh, I'm used to this habit, I'm into the habit now. No. What's actually happening is that your mental processes and your emotional habits are changing on a permanent basis, and you're basically changing who you are. You're changing this identity that you have in front of yourself, and you're making it into something better. You're in a sense, you're actually dying. Like, part of you is dying as you're doing this, because the habits and patterns that created your old life have gone, and the new patterns are creating this new life. It's not just that you sort of fall into this new life. No, you've actually changed, and that's why your life changes. And I think most people miss this out in self-transformation. Another component of playing it at its own game is to reprogram your mind by using affirmations, by repeating yourself things over and over again, by being a hawk of all your negative, a hawk and watching over all your negative thinking and deliberately programming each of those negative thoughts with something constructive. And the final tip I'll give you for altering these self habits, or the habit of you, is to do therapy. You know, psychotherapy, body work, shamanic therapy, treatments that they're sort of designed to target this self habit that you have and to undo all these patterns that you've become identified with, because that's really what the self is. It's a system of habits, mental habits, physical habits, and it's like a big entangled web of habits and patterns that we've been running for years that we've become identified with. So that was the ultimate habit, which is just the habit of being you. And yeah, this is a huge, never-ending project that will really, if we can realize what self-habit we are running, that is a huge area of self-transformation. And we're going to overcome this block of being identified with negative habits and just running those over and over again for years and years. Great, so those are the 4 blocks to self-transformation. What I want you to do is, in the comments section, tell me which of the 4 habits you resonate with the most, which is the one that's caused you most trouble, and which tool you're going to use to overcome that. I'd love to hear what you're struggling with at the moment and how you're going to, what steps you're going to take to build this self-transformation that I'm talking about here. So do subscribe to the Great Updraft channel, and I will see you next week for more.